Hello everybody, welcome back to another Warhammer Warcry video, where today I've got some big news for you. White Dwarf 490 is now out in the wild, and we've got some Warcry content going on. We have 3 new Warcry match play scenarios for you guys to test out, and we've also got some more match play optional rules in the form of Divine Blessings this time round. They seem to be really interesting. They allow you to use any additional points that you might have left over from your list building to kind of modify your fighters. Or maybe if you don't have points left over and you just wanted to build specifically for the Divine Blessings, you can. I think it's pretty cool. But yeah, let's get straight into it. So first up, we have the Test of Champions Battle Pack. Now this is a match play battle pack, so it's designed to be used with the match play terrain setup. Being match play, you can mix it into any of your tournament, or maybe you've got an event pack going on, and you can mix these missions into that. And they're designed to be balanced for both players. They all have fixed deployment maps, and they all have balanced victory conditions where both players have equal opportunity to try and claim whatever it is they're trying to get you to do. You generate the missions as you normally would. So if it's in your battle pack, you roll a dice for it, you generate your terrain, and of course there are no twists. We're following on from the convention that's set with the match play missions in the core book and also in the Rumble pack. So you won't be using those. We've got 3 missions going on. We've got Cursed Prize, Altar of Ascendancy, and Brutal Conquest. So mission 1 is Cursed Prize. You have 2 warbands fighting over a relic too powerful to hold, yet too dangerous to let your opponents get. We can see the deployment map here. You've got your hammer and your shield starting on the battlefield from turn 1. Your dagger will come in starting from round 2. Going on to the victory conditions, so you have a treasure token in the middle of the battlefield. It very much feels like Cursed Relic, this one, in terms of its design and how it works, but we're going to see that it's much more lethal to the holder and everyone around the relic this time around. And I think that for more elite warbands specifically, it opens up some very interesting patterns of play, which we're going to go over. The stipulation is that either the treasure token or the fighter carrying the treasure may deal curse damage. When the treasure token or the fighter carrying the treasure deals curse damage to a fighter, you allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to half their remaining wounds rounding down. For example, if we have a 20 wound fighter, it's already taken 10 wounds, its remaining wounds are 10, and when it takes curse damage, it will deal 5 wounds, because we're talking about half of the remaining wounds of that fighter. Now, it does also say that a fighter who's carrying the treasure can use the Life Leech Curse ability. So Life Leech Curse is on a triple. You pick a visible enemy fighter within 8 inches of this fighter. This fighter deals curse damage to that fighter. Then you remove a number of damage points allocated to this fighter equal to half the number allocated to that enemy fighter by this ability rounding down. Whenever the fighter drops the treasure token deals curse damage to the fighter who drops it, which is very interesting. And then at the beginning of each battle round, the treasure token itself is going to deal curse damage to each fighter within 3 inches. If the treasure's been carried, instead, the fighter who's carrying the treasure takes curse damage. And then on top of that, you allocate the same amount of damage to each other fighter within 3 inches. And the battle lasts for 4 rounds, and when the battle ends, the player whose fighter is carrying the treasure wins. Anything else is a draw. So if no one's carrying the treasure, it's a complete draw. If everyone's dead, it's a draw. Now, there are some interesting things about this particular mission. I think if you were to get the treasure onto a fighter with a big enough wound pool, so let's say we're talking about a 30 wound fighter, for example. When that 30 wound fighter picks up the treasure, at the beginning of the next turn, it's going to take curse damage. So let's say it's undamaged. It's going to take 15 damage itself, but on top of that, it's going to do another 7 damage to everyone within 3 inches. And that's potentially pretty lethal to any kind of chaff fighter, maybe an 8 wound or a 10 wound fighter that wants to kind of go in and maybe steal the treasure off of the guy who's carrying it. I can see a mission like this, warbands with a lot of high wound fighters being extremely valuable. Maybe this is going to be the mission where Noble Rotbringers suddenly comes into their own with all of their 25 wound, their 30 wound, 35 wound fighters. Maybe that could be pretty interesting. I think that'd be pretty nice. Mission 2 is called Altar of Ascendancy. The idea is celestial bodies are aligned. Whoever stands on top of the altar at the appointed hour may be granted the power of the gods themselves. So the idea is when you're setting up your terrain, there has to be one piece of terrain in the middle of the map, and it has to have a platform, and that's going to be your altar, and that's what you're going to be fighting over during this mission. We can see that shields and daggers start on the battlefield on turn 1, and then your hammer is going to come on round 2 along one half of your long table edge. And the victory condition is that after 4 battle rounds, when the battle ends, if only one player has fighters on top of the altar, that player wins. Any other result is a draw. So if no one's on top of the altar, no one wins. Anyone who's within 1 inch of a visible enemy fighter on top of the altar gets a triple that they can use called Unseat. And the idea is that you pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of that fighter, you roll a number of dice equal to this fighter's highest melee weapon strength, and if the total is equal to or higher than the enemy fighter's wounds, you can place that fighter on the floor 3 inches horizontally from this fighter, and then that enemy fighter suffers impact damage. So the idea is, if you have a fighter with a high enough strength, you roll. If you beat their wounds characteristic, you get to throw their fighters off of the altar. So ideally what you're going to want are fighters with a high strength characteristic and a high amount of wounds. And again, very much like the first mission, this really favors more elite warbands that can get those more expensive, tougher, higher wounded, more damaging fighters onto the battlefield. I would expect that Unseat will mostly be used on rounds 3 and 4. It really depends on how tall your altar is going to be in this case. If it's only 3 inches tall, then maybe you'll be able to get up there in one turn, but you won't necessarily be able to clear enemy fighters off of the altar. So perhaps you're going to have to use Unseat to throw them off. But I can see on the first couple of turns, what you're going to have is probably smaller skirmishes around the bottom of the altar to try and control that area for you to be able to jump onto it on turn 4 to be able to score the points. And going into mission 3, it's called Brutal Conquest. Legends are forged on the battlefield, and a fighter with a legend great enough can set their enemies to flight by simply taking to the field. 2 great champions seek to win such a reputation for themselves. Looking at the deployment map, we have hammers and daggers starting on the battlefield. Shields will come on round 2 behind your opponent's dagger. And what we're going to be doing during this battle is we're going to be nominating our fighters to be great champions. And the idea is, when a fighter makes an attack action that takes a target down, if that player does not have a great champion on the battlefield, that player can nominate that fighter as their great champion. So you kill a guy, and then they become the great champion. Each player should keep a tally of the damage allocated to enemy fighters by their great champion, including damage allocated to the fighter taken down by that attack action that made them the great champion in the first place. And the idea is that the battle ends after 4 battle rounds, and when that battle ends, the player whose great champion on the battlefield has the highest tally wins. Any other result is a draw. So you need a great champion to live and be there at the end of the battle. If your great champion happens to die, you can get another one of your fighters to kill a guy, and then that will become a great champion. So you'll be able to continue that way, but he'll have his own new tally to build up. So you kind of want to make sure that your fighter lives throughout the battle and does that damage. Great champions get access to the Forge a Legend ability as part of this. So again, it's another triple. Forge a Legend. Until the end of the activation, each time this fighter's attack action takes down an enemy fighter, that fighter can make a bonus move and then a bonus attack. So this is very much like the Vanguard's ability, where if you kill a guy, you get an extra move and an extra attack action. The Vanguard doesn't tend to use it much because it's using all of its dice generally in its attack boosting abilities. And generally, if you have your great champion on the battlefield already, he's going to be using his abilities to try and kill whatever it is he's fighting to try and build up his tally. So I don't really see all that much use of Forge a Legend, but perhaps it could come in use if you haven't used any abilities already to begin with. In addition to that, there's one more special rule here. At the end of the battle round, starting with the player with the initiative, if a player's great champion is on the battlefield, each enemy fighter within 4 inches of the battlefield edge is taken down, and their wounds characteristic is added to that great champion's tally. This does not affect other great champions. So, effectively what this does is it forces your opponents to engage with your great champion and not dance around the edges of the map, try and avoid him, try and reduce his tally that way. So if you did try and run away and you did happen to end up within 4 inches of the edge of the battlefield, you just die automatically and you're giving your opponent 3 points. One thing I think to take home about all three of these missions is that they do very much favor smaller, hyper damaging warbands with a lot of wounds, a lot of toughness, and a lot of strength to their fighters. You're going to need that for your great champion to really knock down your opponents. You're going to need that to survive in the last mission with the cursed treasure. And you're going to need it to be able to really shove people off of the altar in that particular mission. I think that's something to bear in mind if you're using these missions as a self-contained pack. I do think that one of the better things for you to do would be to mix these missions into your other match play missions. So let's say if you're running an event or you're randomly generating your missions, it will give other different kinds of warbands the ability to win those missions as opposed to others that might be favored in the event. So for example, let's say we're running the Rumble Pack. The Rumble Pack, as we know, heavily favors Swarm, but if you mix these three missions into the Rumble Pack and then they turned up, these are heavily skewed towards elite warbands. So it gives both Swarm and elite warbands a place to try and win their games if you mix these in. Next up, we've got some match play optional rules here. They're called Divine Blessings. They are optional, like I said, so they're used with both players' consent, but they are for match play. So they're designed to be used in a constructed or in a tournament setting. Narrative play has its own set of advancement rules, so this isn't really something you would use for those. And the idea is that once you've determined your battle plan, for each fighter in your warband, you can pick one blessing for them from this table. Players do this at the same time, and you secretly make a note of each blessing, and then you reveal them at the same time. When you pick a blessing for a fighter, you increase that fighter's points value by the amount listed beside the blessing. For a fighter whose wounds characteristic is 22 or less, you use the regular points value. And then for a fighter whose wounds characteristic is 23 or more, you can use the second elite value. So the idea is you have these different blessings, and if you have any spare points left over from your list building, you can apply one of these blessings or several of these blessings to your fighters. One important thing to note is that you can only add one blessing to any particular fighter at one time, so you can't stack swiftness, resilience, and fortitude on one guy, for example. But apart from that, you're allowed to put the same blessing onto multiple fighters. Going through the blessings very quickly, you've got swiftness, which is +1 move, resilience +1 toughness, fortitude +4 wounds, ferocity +1 attack, might +1 strength. An interesting distinction to make between ferocity and might. Ferocity only works on melee weapons, whereas might works on any of the fighter's weapons. Brutality adds 1 to the first damage characteristic, so the normal damage of one of this fighter's melee weapons. Savagery, again for melee weapons, but to the second damage, so we're talking about the crit damage in this case. Heroism allows the fighter to use Inspiring Presence as if they were a hero. Spite allows 1 free reaction per battle round. And then you've got Destiny, where you begin the battle with 1 saved wild dice. So giving an example here, I've got my Spirit Host here with the Blessing of Savagery. Blessing of Savagery gives +1 in effect to your crit damage, so the Spirit Host goes up to 1/4. It will now cost 180 points because you're adding 10 points to its cost. And the reason why we would do that is because of Frightful Touch. And the Frightful Touch triple allows the Spirit Host to make every single hit count as a crit instead. So all those 6 attacks are suddenly going to be hitting for 4 damage when they hit, which is pretty strong, I think. For 180 points on a triple, I think that's pretty powerful with the 6 attacks of the Spirit Host. Just as a general thing here, I think Ferocity is going to be very useful on 2 or 3 attack high damage fighters, because effectively what you're doing is you're adding 25 to 33% extra damage, depending on how many attacks it started with, for only 25 or 30 points, depending on how many wounds the fighter has. I think Spite as a free reaction seems like it could be really powerful, depending on which fighter it is that you gave it to. Some people have been saying maybe you put it on your Kharadron Overlords characters to get some free shots in. You could put it on a Cities of Sigmar character, for example, to generate free wild dice. That might be interesting. I think Ferocity and Brutality seem like they're going to be the most useful, because generally in Warcry, those are the 2 most interesting stats that we are going to be looking at. And I really do think that someone's going to be able to use Destiny, so the +1 wild dice on the first turn, to great effect. Maybe if you've got a really powerful triple, or maybe even a quad that you want to build around and you want to use turn 1, having that free wild dice on turn 1 might enable those plays and allow you to do what it is that you want to do. A quick note about the points values that they've assigned here. We can see that the most expensive ones are Ferocity and Brutality at 25 points for the basic guys. And we're talking about just for your basic stats here. It kind of shows you where Games Workshop are at this point in terms of how valuable they see their characteristics. Whereas previously fighters would pay a lot for its move. Now we're looking towards, if you want to boost your fighters, you're going to be paying for your attacks and you're going to be paying for your normal damage characteristic. That is it from me for today. That's all from White Dwarf 490. Like I said at the beginning, it's always good to get more match play content out there for Warcry. I prefer to play my games in a more structured format than playing something like narrative or just determining what I'm going to be playing from the cards. So that's always nice to see. I want to give a big shout out to the Hobby Jackal for providing the images for this. Go check out his YouTube. It's really entertaining. He does Warcry stuff as well. So that's all really great on my part. As always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about these missions, how you think they might fit into your tournament packs, if that's something that you're doing as an organizer, or how you think it might affect your list building, and also about the Divine Blessings, if you think there are any cool combos that you could put together. The Spirit Host was just something that I came up with off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's hundreds of other viable builds that you can put together, and it'd be really interesting to hear what you guys can come up with. But yeah, that's it. Like I said, that's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.